Joining us now for his only interview following yesterday's remarks by Robert Mueller, former acting director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe. He's the author of the book, The Threat, How the FBI Protects America in the Age of Terror and Trump. Mr. Director, it's good to have you on this morning. We've been talking a lot over the last almost 2 hours about what we saw and heard yesterday in those 8 minutes from Director Mueller. What did you hear from where you sit?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, Willie, and thanks for having me on. What I saw yesterday as I watched the broadcast live was really vintage Bob Mueller. This was Bob Mueller delivering exactly what he thought, without adornment, without extra words, short to the point, delivering his message, and then stepping away, as he hopes, from the microphones permanently. We'll see if that hope comes through.
Andy, yesterday's very stark performance, very Mueller-esque performance, seems to have focused largely in public opinion terms, in terms of what we do here every day, on the obstruction element, because it was pretty well laid out in Volume 2 of his report. But the obstruction evidence that is listed in Mr. Mueller's report, it gets to, but we don't talk about it a lot, the DNA of the crime at the crime scene. And the DNA of the crime scene is Russia's declaration of war against the United States and attacking our electoral institutions then, and perhaps even now, and going forward, perhaps in 2020. So my question to you is, do you think that Donald Trump is in cahoots with Russia? Is he aware of what's going on with the Russians? Why hasn't he spoken about the Russians? What is his involvement with Russia that seems to be that he goes to great lengths to cover up?
Yeah, so, Mike, that's a great question, and I think that that's a little bit of, I read anyway from Director Mueller's comments yesterday, that's a little bit of his frustration that the constant talk about the obstruction side of the investigation has somewhat eclipsed the more important, or in Director Mueller's eyes, clearly more important issue of the systemic, pervasive attack waged by the government of Russia, directed by its president, Vladimir Putin, and executed by its military and intelligence services on the foundations of our democratic process. And as he said, it's something that every American should be very concerned about. Whether or not the president has some sort of connection to the Russians or is influence to the Russians, I think the only thing we know for certain at this point is that Bob Mueller's team did not uncover that. I think that there's obviously more investigating to do. There are several other investigative avenues that are being pursued by the Congress through their oversight authority and through other investigations that spun off of the Mueller team's inquiry. But the crime here, Mike, is that almost 3 years after this election, we are still talking about the politics around this issue, and we have yet to take a significant step to ensure that the Russians aren't successful in attacking our democracy again.
Carol?
Yeah, Director, one of the interpretations of Robert Mueller's statement yesterday was that it was a rebuke of the Attorney General. And, both sides put out a statement saying, there was no daylight here, and tried to kind of paper over whatever apparent differences there were. What was your takeaway from what he said? Did you see that as him doing a counterpoint to everything that the Attorney General had done so far?
My experience with Director Mueller is that he's probably the last person on earth that wants to engage in a tit-for-tat counterpoint with the Attorney General. The Attorney General, who for this function was his boss, and as we all know is also a personal friend of his. However, Director Mueller would not have come out and made the statement he made yesterday, would not have written the letter he sent to Attorney General Barr after completing the report, if he wasn't concerned about the way the results of his team had been misrepresented by the Attorney General's original comments. So I think this was Bob Mueller's way of very clearly underlining what he thought the most important aspects of their work were, and I think this is the statement that Americans should focus on.
So, Andrew, as we take a step back from this, the argument from the White House, and they're not alone in this country, I don't think, is that a nonpartisan actor, a highly respected man in Robert Mueller, the former FBI director, was given 2 years, given all the resources he needed, a full staff, interview anybody he wanted to talk to, and he concluded in Volume 1 anyway that there was insufficient evidence to establish a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Do you accept that conclusion, knowing what you know, that the Trump campaign did not work with the Russian government, or just that there was not a sufficient evidence found by Director Mueller that that happened?
Willie, concluding that you don't have sufficient evidence to prove under the criminal law in this country the existence of a conspiracy is very different than concluding that all kinds of inappropriate contacts took place. I mean, we know now from the report something over 140 contacts between individuals associated with the campaign, contacting and having interactions with Russians or people connected to the intelligence services. This is unprecedented activity. So, what has been billed as no collusion, no obstruction should probably be recast as no witch hunt and no exoneration. I think that was the message that Bob Mueller was telling us yesterday.
So what's your suspicion then, given those 2 years and all the resources that Bob Mueller had, that he couldn't establish that kind of a conspiracy?
Well, I think the report clearly lays out some of the challenges he had in obtaining the testimony of some witnesses and obtaining documents and evidence of communications from folks who had gone to some length to conceal or destroy those communications. So look, he had a tough hurdle to get over from the very beginning. But again, read the report. We all know the details of the interactions that are laid out in that Volume 1. They are significant. And I'll say this, too. I was struck by the amount of detail that the Mueller team put in the report about the government of Russia's activities. You have specific military units being identified, the tactics and techniques they were using to influence the campaign. It is an extraordinarily high level of detail to reveal about a federal investigation, and I think it was done purposefully to show the American people exactly the seriousness of what we were confronting.
So then, do you believe that there was a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government?
I think there's no doubt that there's absolutely no doubt that the Russians were interfering with the election for the purpose of helping the Trump campaign. There is also no doubt that the Trump campaign was receptive to that assistance, was interested in receiving that assistance. The one thing we lack is kind of the keystone in the bridge, that agreement between the two parties. And I think what we have here is just a clear lack of evidence to bring a prosecution on those grounds.
But you believe there was a conspiracy there?
I believe there was a strong desire, a willingness on both parts. I can't sit here and point to that evidence of an agreement.
Do you believe there was obstruction on the part of the President of the United States?
I believe, and I think the Mueller report details quite clearly, that the President engaged in numerous acts intended to obstruct and impede the investigation.
Would you recommend the United States Congress bring up impeachment?
I think it's important that the United States Congress does its job. I think that the American people have the right to hear in detail from witnesses what the Mueller team found out. I mean, look at the impact of just Director Mueller's 9-minute statement yesterday. People are talking about and thinking about this investigation in a different way in the last 24 hours, simply as a result of the fact that Director Mueller came on TV and spoke about it. I think, look, the fact is, most Americans are not going to sit down and read a 400-page report. I think it would be important for folks to hear from some of the key witnesses and to make up their own minds about what they think about the president's behavior.
Should Director Mueller testify before Congress?
I expect that he probably will, as much as he probably wants that least in life. If subpoenaed, I'm sure that Director Mueller would comply with that process.
All right, Noah Ruffman.
Director, you've been making a very clear distinction between conduct that is untoward and conduct that is prosecutable. In Rod Rosenstein's dissection of James Comey's conduct in October of 2016, he admonished the former FBI director for essentially impugning Hillary Clinton without the evidence sufficient to prosecute. That's not what the DOJ does, right? Is that essentially, in a way, what Bob Mueller did here? He said that we cannot impugn this kind of conduct. It is up to the president to have a trial by trial, essentially the conduct that would be examined in Congress. But is he impugning the president's character in a way that is beyond the DOJ's scope because it's insufficient to prosecute?
I don't think so, no. I see your argument, but I don't think that's where Director Mueller was going. There is always that strong bias towards not making any statements or revealing any details about cases that are not brought. This is far from the traditional criminal case. Of course, that's the same reasoning that Director Comey and I and others on the team brought to the decision to make the statement in July of 2016, a decision that we very well may have made in error. However, the remit given to Director Mueller as a special counsel was to report to the Attorney General exactly what he had found. He has done that, and the Attorney General made the decision to release that report to the public, which I think was the right one.
Andy, if you could, for 2.5 years, this country, and the FBI specifically, has been under assault. A vital institution has been under assault, largely led by the President of the United States. Looking back at it, the 2.5 years you've been under assault, along with several FBI agents, could you assess and talk about the damage you think may have occurred to this institution, and what happens to people when their personal lives, their professional lives, are maligned in public by the President of the United States?
Yeah, Mike, I could go on for another hour about that one based on my own experiences. It is personally, professionally, reputationally devastating to have to sustain these sorts of attacks from the leader of this country, the person charged with upholding the law, the person charged with supporting and defending institutions like the Department of Justice and the FBI. I worry about what impact those attacks will have on the institution long term. I think that the president's attacks and undermining the credibility of the institution makes the job harder for the men and women who are out there protecting this country every day. So that concerns me greatly. Do I think they will stop doing that job? Absolutely not. I have complete faith in my former colleagues that they will continue to do what they have to do. It's just another burden they have to carry day in and day out, sustaining those sorts of attacks from the president.
Well, speaking of those attacks from the president, here he is 1 week ago talking about you.
Sir, the Constitution says treason is punishable by death. You've accused your adversaries of treason. Who specifically are you accusing of treason?
Well, I think a number of people, and I think what you look is that they have unsuccessfully tried to take down the wrong person. If you look at Comey, if you look at McCabe, if you look at probably people higher than that, if you look at Strzok, they want an insurance policy so that should she, for any reason, lose, remember, 100 million to 1. Maybe he said 100 million to nothing. But should she lose, we'll have an insurance policy and we'll get this guy out of office. And that's what they said, and that's what they meant. That's treason. That's treason.
Director McCabe, that's the President of the United States at the White House last week accusing you of treason. How do you respond?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's outrageous. I can't describe for you how impactful it is to see the President of the United States mention your name in the same sentence with words like treason and the death penalty. But let's put that aside just for a second and focus on the facts. It's impossible to unwind all of the misstatements and falsehoods in that clip that you just ran, but let's just focus on the fact that people who know what treason means understand that nothing that the FBI did, that the Department of Justice did, or that I did, or any of the folks I worked with has anything to do with treason or plotting a coup or trying to take down a government. The fact is, Willie, we at the FBI investigate Russia. And in 2016, the investigation and focus on Russia and threats from Russia took us to the president's campaign. And so we did our job. Under those circumstances, with clear information to indicate that a threat to national security might exist, which is, of course, the threshold for FBI investigation, we stepped up to that responsibility and conducted that investigation. I think Director Mueller's report, his statements following the report, completely validate the decisions we made. There clearly was a threat to U.S. national security in the conduct of the Russians interfering with our 2016 election.
Director, and just to follow up on that, you say that no one would lightly use the term treason at the FBI because they know the meaning of it. And you, in February, suggested that it was possible that Donald Trump was an asset of Russia. And you certainly understand what it means to be an asset of a foreign government. You said that you were anxious to review the Mueller report when it came out and would offer further commentary there. After reading the report, do you believe that Donald Trump is a Russian asset?
Well, I think that the report makes clear that they did not uncover evidence of that sort of a relationship. So based on what Director Mueller's team revealed in the report, I'd have to say, no, we still have not seen clear evidence of that. But again, that's not the position we're in at the beginning of an investigation. We initiate investigations because we think a threat to national security might exist. We have a member of the campaign who tells a friendly foreign government that the Russians have offered to provide assistance in the form of stolen emails that'll denigrate the opposing candidate, Hillary Clinton. That is more than enough reason to believe that we have the potential of a relationship of influence on a campaign by our foreign adversary, and that's why we took the steps we did.
And as we pointed out many times, that threat remains. Russia's still looking at influencing our elections. Former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe, we appreciate your time this morning. His recent book is The Threat: How the FBI Protects America in the Age of Terror and Trump. These are live pictures of Air Force One as President Trump is set to depart the White House any moment now on his way to Colorado to deliver remarks at the 2019 graduation ceremony for the United States Air Force Academy. If the president does stop to speak to reporters on his way out of the White House, we will bring it to you right away. Morning Joe is back in 3 minutes.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.